This podcast episode was originally recorded for the Healing Souls podcast and is being refurbished for your enjoyment.
Welcome to the Healing Souls podcast. This is Natasha Helfer. Today, I am really thrilled to have a friend and colleague, and actually supervisee of mine, Allan Alexander. He is a marriage and family therapist, got his degree from National University in California and works in San Diego. Pretty close to getting your licensure, which is a big deal. So super excited for you on that, Allan.
Yes. My big exam is coming up the 21st of next month.
Oh, it's a process. I remember those days for sure.
I'm in frantic study mode. So
yes.
I crammed grad school back in my head after several years of being away from it.
Yeah. It was a second career for you, obviously, right? And so, yeah, that's exciting.
Well, actually 3.0. So, yeah. Career 3.0.
I love it. Well, recreating ourselves is always an exciting part of life. So good for you.
Life's a journey.
Well, the reason I'm interviewing Allan today is because he has a very fascinating job. Maybe, I don't know if you would use that term, but he works at San Diego Youth Services. And part of his work there is doing assessments for what's called CSEC, commercial sexual exploitation of children, or, minors. And so we're talking about kind of like 18 and under. And there's been a lot of hype here lately. There's been like conspiracy theories and groups and advocacy ideas. And I constantly see kind of on my Facebook feed, especially, or social media in general, like phases. It seems like there's these phases of fear-based information that is usually espoused by well-meaning parents, possibly even well-meaning organizations, that I think cloud the complexities and the information that really would actually be useful in understanding this very concerning problem of sexual exploitation in regards to minors that I would assume most of us have some concern about, right? So is that a fair intro to all of this, Allan?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I'm always happy when well-intentioned people become aware of this issue, but I always like to make sure that we're myth busting and getting the facts out.
Okay, so that's what we're planning on doing today. We're going to myth bust and get facts out. And it's been interesting to supervise you because all of the cases that you've brought, to my attention have been cases where a lot of these kids are talking to you about their experiences. So before we get too far into that, why don't I give you an opportunity to maybe talk about the top, 3 to 5 myths that are out there? What types of frustrating information do you feel makes the rounds that you're like, oh, that's not exactly the most helpful way to think about it?
I guess at the top of the list is that there's the whole NIMBY thing, not in my backyard. And that tends to be more from affluent areas where socioeconomic status doesn't play a large role. Most people think this is a poverty issue. And while poverty plays a role, no community is immune. This does happen in upper middle class neighborhoods. Prior to working in juvenile hall, where I work now, for 3 years, I worked in the school system. And I actually had a chance to work with youth in middle school and high school, both from very severely socioeconomically challenged areas to very affluent areas. And the problem is universal.
And so when you think about the problem, maybe let's think about, before I go on to myth number 2, let's think about how it shows up in these communities. So in other words, if you're thinking about an affluent neighborhood, what's happening in order for somebody to meet the qualifications of a CSEC person, and what's happening in the more challenged, socioeconomically challenged neighborhoods for that to happen?
Well, the number one underlying risk factor is a disconnect with parents or guardians. And that occurs across the socioeconomic spectrum, across the gender spectrum, across the ethnicity or race spectrum, and no community is immune from it. It's the number one factor. I mean, the very first question that we ask on the assessment tool is, have you run away from home or do you frequently run away from home? Because it's being away from the watchful eye, that parent control that guardians and parents have, that put them most at risk for these predatory recruiters to make contact with them.
And really, at some point, that does get back to resources then, because even if you're running away from a socially affluent home, you're more than likely, if you're a minor, not to have access to a lot of financial resources, which then puts you at risk. Is that a fair thing for me to say, or not so much?
Oh, sure. I mean, especially there's among youth today, well, maybe even not today, there's always that need for, I need to keep up with the Joneses, so to speak. I need to keep up with whatever's on social media right now. I need the latest this, I need the best that. And that's common to all teenagers. All teens and children want the best and the shiniest new whatever it is that's at the top of their list. And while being connected to family and community tends to channel that towards more pro-social type of activities, such as getting a part-time job, whatever's going to work for you, what if your family has something available for you, or if you need to seek outside employment, that's a greater possibility. But as soon as you become disconnected from that support, that social support, that watchful eye, that caring control, then yes, you become extremely vulnerable because you have no resources and you're out there on your own. And these predators, these recruiters are extremely good at sniffing that out. They excel at it. I wish they would turn their I wish they would turn their people expertise to the helping side instead of the exploiting side, because they're actually so good at it. But
What
that's
makes
not the
them,
case.
yeah, what makes them good at it? What types of things makes them good at sniffing that out, like you say?
Well, here's a really scary fact. Most runaway youth are approached by a recruiter within 15 minutes of being out on the street. That's how good they are, because they've got their own extra set of eyes and ears with other youth that they've exploited, who are on the lookout for youth who are currently adrift. And so they connect with them. They're very good at sensing what it is you're looking for. And most of it is longing. It is the longing for belonging, to really feel like somebody's listening to you and somebody appreciates you. So there's a lot of up talk that goes on as far as, oh, you're beautiful. I can't believe people haven't realized what a fantastic person you are, things like this. There's a very kind of sweet seduction early phase that can go on.
Yeah, which can feel like genuine friendship and or even romance to the runaway teen.
Yeah, the boyfriend role is a very common recruiting tactic, in that they will wine and dine them in the early days, and then it slowly starts turning, oh, if you love me, you'll do me this favor, which usually involves having sex with a friend, but really it's some other pimp or something like that. And it's just this slow turning. And a lot of the youth actually end up trauma bonding with them. And unfortunately, that trauma bond in youth is extremely strong and difficult to break sometimes.
Okay, so going back to the myths, because this reminds me of what I think is a myth, but you're welcome to correct me. I think a myth oftentimes is that parents are afraid of this, dark van coming down the street and swiping your kid and then forcing them into some space where they're handcuffed and having to perform, horrific acts. And I'm not saying that that never happens. And yet I feel like what you just described is 100 times more likely, which is this slow kind of seduction that starts from a fairly consensual, if you want to say, perspective. I mean, it's not consensual in the sense of honesty or not being coercive, but from the teen's perspective can feel like this is a choice I'm making and I like this person and I want to be with them, and et cetera, et cetera. Is that a fair myth busting?
Yes, absolutely. We're all very familiar with like the Liam Neeson Taken movie. That's what we tend to think of, because that's what Hollywood has popularized for us. But it's usually much more insidious, much closer to home. Here in San Diego, where I am, sex trafficking is the number 2 underground economy, right behind drug trafficking. And it's all the more a problem for us because, of course, we're a border town. So there's a lot of cross, and those things overlap. A youth may get involved in, well, here, carry these drugs for me because they won't search you because you're a kid, or things like that. And then they get used to fast money. So there's other ways that they recruit them too, and that's usually by the easy money, the fast money, the the fast and loose lifestyle that they're looking for. As far as it seems very upscale, and as you said, it plays into the somebody's listening to me, I'm making these choices, I'm making this money, and it seems like they've achieved a great deal of independence and adultness in their life, when the reverse is actually true. It's actually a very manipulative seduction phase.
Okay, so that would be a myth too. So what else? What else would be a myth, Allan?
The myth is that this largely happens only to females. It's hugely, vastly underreported among the males who are commercially sexually exploited. Ironically, because it's, well, not surprisingly on the one hand, because it's seen as a huge assault to their masculinity. And the other is doubly so, and ironically, because there's a huge bias in that, oh, if you're engaging in this, then you must be gay. Because the number 1 consumer for both males and females are male clients. So there's this stigma that boys don't overcome, and they underreport because they're afraid to say, yes, I did this, because then they think their masculinity has been completely destroyed, because the number 1 consumer is men. So it's men having sex with men, which is different than being gay, and a lot of the boys will frame this as survival sex. I just did what I needed to do to survive. And most boys don't have a pimp or a recruiter. They're what they call renegade. They're out there on their own. So that's extremely hard to track. But the real numbers are really unknown.
What makes it harder to track those numbers because they're not under a pimp versus renegade?
Yeah, it's harder to track because if you do find a youth who is involved in sexual exploitation, sex trafficking, the youth is never arrested and charged with prostitution. We don't do that in California. The youth is taken into custody but treated as a victim. It's the recruiter, the pimp, someone like that. That's the person that they're trying to arrest and charge. And that helps because then they get access to the network of who that person is controlling and recruiting and things like that. These renegades, these youth that are off doing it by themselves, you're able to rescue the one victim, but then you don't have access to any sort of network or a recruiter or a pimp where you're really affecting more of the cause rather than the symptom.
Okay. So risk factor number 1, or myth number 1, is it's not happening in my neighborhood. Myth number 2 is that this only happens kind of in this kidnappy Hollywood, kind of sensationalized way. And 3, females are more affected than males, when really it's very prominent regardless of sex.
Yes.
What other myths do you have for me?
I think the next one would be that you have to be predisposed or somehow vulnerable to this, either because you're using drugs or you have some sort of mental health issue going on. And this can happen with perfectly healthy individuals, although being trafficked does lead to a lot of substance use disorders and mental health issues. So it's backwards. Most people think that it's because you have these problems, when really it's trafficking causes a lot of these problems.
That's really interesting. The chicken and the egg kind of assuming, yeah, for sure. Okay, anything else in the myth category?
That it primarily happens to certain ethnic groups. That's not true. This is commercial sexual exploitation. So, it bothers me to think of it like this, but this is how the user side, the user abuser side of it thinks about it. This is a commercial transaction. And to them, these kids are product. And when you think about supply and demand, which is how any business operates, there's a huge myth that this happens mostly to the African American community. And that's so not true. And when you think about it, the number one consumer of these services is Caucasian male. So simple logic follows, do Caucasian males only want to have sex with underage African American minors? No, of course not. It happens to all ethnicities because it's a simple matter of supply and demand. And that goes as far as crossing gender boundaries too, with the males and the females.
So where are these statistics coming from that it's white male consumers? Tell me a little bit more about that. What do we know about the consumer side of this?
Well, that's a national statistic that's upheld by, both the FBI and, of course, the National Centers for Missing and Exploited Children, many research studies and organizations out there. It's primarily, your white, well, and you have to think about who's got the money to burn on this. Who's got the extra cash to spend on things like this? Not that somebody who isn't, say, as affluent, person A versus person B, it's not always a matter of economics, but access equals abuse. And so it's the people that have more financial resources that end up with the access to these youth. And so there is a kind of a socioeconomic status going on there for the people who actually exploit the youth versus socioeconomic status has nothing to do with the youth themselves.
Okay, so given all of those myths, then let's start talking about the facts. So of course, as you're debunking the myths, you're giving us a lot of facts. And yet, what if you would say, like you started off with risk factors. So you said the number one risk factor is being disconnected from like a parent guardian type mentor in your life. What are the other risk factors that we should be aware of?
Any sort of previous involvement with child protective services or child welfare services, that's a very large risk factor because that already presupposes that there is a breakdown in the family unit. There's already a problem going on. So that's kind of secondary, but it's also a very large part of what's going on. Truancy from school is a very large one. So for all your parent and guardian knows, your child left for school this morning, but then if they're skipping school a lot, if they're going off campus, if they're getting into the community, they're as vulnerable as a runaway youth is.
Okay. Any other risk factors?
Yes, and that would be any sort of trauma or violence in the home. And that may have been something that's been resolved, but trauma lasts, it plays itself out throughout a child's developmental life and even their adult life. So even though the trauma may have happened, and it doesn't have to have happened to the child themselves, domestic violence can play a large issue in this as well. Children who witness domestic violence and that broken home, it plays a very large role, especially for young female, because without a positive male role model around, then they're much more susceptible to that seduction by other males, adult males.
Well, and I'm glad you talked about that because when you talk about disconnect, I think about emotional disattachment, right? Like maybe parents who aren't that involved or et cetera. But what you're discussing now is much more the trauma, the abuse, if a child is being sexually or physically abused in their own home, et cetera. Sorry, I'm letting my doggies out. They're trying, in a sense, to escape from running away. It's not just that they want attention or that they want connection. They're escaping their own levels of violence in their own homes.
They are, yes, very much so. Especially if they've been physically abused. And kind of the hidden flag among youth is emotional abuse. So it's that emotional disconnect like you just talked about. It's that lack of support, that lack of esteem building, that lack of feeling that they have somebody they can turn to, that they can really talk to. And when they go looking for that outside of the home, again, it's, it's like swimming in shark infested waters out there. They're vulnerable, and those sharks are really good at identifying who the prey is.
Right, right. Yeah, and emotional abuse being like belittlement, name calling, putting a person down. A lot of, I believe, I would say another risk factor is probably LGBT youth, right? In
Oh,
regards to,
yes, very much so, because those youth tend to disproportionately be kicked out of their home. So they're forced into that situation, whether they were looking to go there or not.
Mhm, mhm, right. All right. So, given all of that and protecting, of course, the identity of any person you've seen, are you able to give us a few kind of stories or story-esque type cases where you can share this is what a typical case might look like? Maybe like a female version, a male version, maybe a gay or lesbian version, etc.
Sure. I've got an example of a youth I worked with who was released from juvenile hall, didn't have the best relationship with parents. In fact, the youth had requested to be sent to a group home, which surprisingly is another risk factor because placement outside the home. But she requested to go there, was sent back home, has that very caustic and upsetting relationship with parents. So ran away from home. Here we go again, running away from home with a youth that she had met in the hall with another youth that ran away to another youth that she'd met in the hall. Turns out that this other female is actually what's known as a bottom girl. The bottom girl is like a temporary recruiter's right hand person.
Mm-hmm.
And they're the ones that have been so completely seduced and involved in this that they actually will recruit and exploit other youth their own age.
Mm-hmm.
And so they wound up at a motel to, we're just going to go party. I know these really nice guys, and so she gets to the motel, and then, it's basically a setup. And so they confiscate her phone, they're not letting her leave. And there are different recruitment techniques, and one of them is by physical force and violence. So that whole taken thing, while it's not the black van, it can be something as simple as, hey, I know some guys, we're going to go party with them at this motel. And the next thing you know, you've been targeted for exploitation. She did manage later to get a hold of a phone. So she called her father. Father and brother go down to the motel to try and rescue her. And the recruiters, the males present on site, actually stabbed her father, putting him in the hospital where he fought for his life.
Goodness. Yeah.
So
So
the
very.
violent way of recruiting actually does occur.
Mm-hmm.
And this was a youth from a very upper middle class family. So the whole not in my backyard thing, I'm afraid that you're not immune. As far as an LGBTQ youth, the most common, sadly, examples are trans youth.
Mm-hmm.
Trans youth are even higher than your lesbian or gay or bisexual counterparts to be especially thrown out of the home.
Mm-hmm.
And they engage in a lot of survival sex. Most of them, in my experience, they are recruited, but they don't tend to want to stay with a recruiter. They tend to stay more independent with the ones I work with. Other populations and other localities, your mileage is going to vary. That's going to be different. But here in San Diego, they're more independent, but they're at much higher risk for not only being sexually exploited, but for being physically assaulted and even murdered.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And one of
Yeah.
those is a youth of mine that popping up on our radar because kept scoring really high on the CSEC appraisal that we use. But eventually, after 2 or 3 times in and out, this youth is now an intervention counts. So finding that person, a mentor, anybody that youth can connect with, drastically reduces any sort of recurrence.
Mm-hmm.
The recurrence rate goes way down if you can just connect them to one caring adult who can show up in their life and be there. For this youth, it happened to be a transition mentor, which is an adult trans person who's gone through the process. But once that youth was able to find somebody that actually understood what they're going through and was able to form that stable attachment and could look up to them, could rely on them, and felt they were being heard and understood, any sort of sexual exploitation or survival sex has stopped.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So success happens if we just get them connected. And it's that disconnection at home that is so critical. And if they can't be connected at home, because a lot of these youth, the drug and alcohol and mental health issues, not with the youth, it's with the parents. Parents with mental health issues, parents with substance abuse issues, parents with involvement in the justice system. That really does get visited upon the children and affects them in enormous ways.
Yes, yes. And it's been, we've been working together for over a year now, I believe. And, and listening to so many of the cases that you bring to my supervisor setting, it's shocking to me how many of the kids you talk about really don't have one person, not one, a grandparent or an aunt or a teacher or a friend's parent, right? Like somebody in the neighborhood and they're really lacking that adult support network in their lives, dramatically so.
Yes, they really are. And it's such a shame, because if we could just get them connected just once, if they could find somebody they could trust. And, frankly, it's why I do what I do. I don't like working in juvenile hall, but that's where the kids are. There's nothing great about going to juvenile hall other than the kids. But, I just keep trying to show up. And, if I can just be that one person that just keeps showing up and keeps saying, I hear you. I understand, I may not have experienced what you experienced, but I can help you now. And if you can just plant that seed,
yeah,
and even if they don't get to connect with me on an ongoing basis, if you can just plant that little bit of a seed that says, yes, there are adults out there that care and listen and are willing to help you. It's so crucial.
Yeah, and a less dire situation, well, not dire, but I guess less dramatic case that I remember you talking to me about had to do with, I believe, a female case of yours where she really didn't have a place to go, but she was really desperately trying to finish high school because she had good aspirations to go on to college, etc. And so she was engaging in survival sex in the sense that I think she was basically sleeping on, a friend's couch, which happened to be an older kind of like mid-20s man, and would give him sexual favors from here to here because, he gave her a place to stay. So it wasn't necessarily it wasn't coercive. He wasn't taking her phone. He wasn't not coercive in the sense of like this motel experience that you shared earlier. She could have left at any point, but it was like, I'm going to do this because I need to finish high school.
Yeah. And a lot of the kids, that shows how resilient they are. A lot of them do have these aspirations. They don't want to be doing this. They want a normal life. They just want to belong. And it's that sense of belonging, but I remember who you're talking about. And to me, that youth was teaching me about strength because I wonder how I could have survived in the same situation. And it's such a shame because these youth do have some place in their lives, in their future that they're trying to get. They're all trying to get from point A to point B. And it's getting from point A to point B. Is somebody going to help them get there? Are they going to do it in a healthy way or are they going to do it in an exploitative way?
Right. Well, so given that you're in the system, what are we doing well? And what are we not doing well at all? So in other words, when people get all up in arms and they're all hyper and we've got to stop sex trafficking, I feel like a lot of times those efforts fall very flat because we're not really addressing societal issues, poverty, resource issues, group community issues, mental health issues. Like our monies traditionally in this country don't go to a lot of those types of kind of foundational building blocks for communities. So I don't know, teach me where I am, or I'm correct, or I'm off.
No, it's true. The revolving door in juvenile hall, it's ridiculous. The recidivism rate is so high because you can work with a youth in the hall either for a very short period of time, because some of them are only there for a matter of weeks, but others are there for a matter of months up to a year. And so you can work with them a little more longer term. But no matter how much you work with them in the hall, everything can become completely undone if you're sending them back to the same problems that they were trying to escape from. So there needs to be a lot more focus on not just working with the kids in the hall, but then what is the situation they're going into? Are they going into a situation where you've got a mom or a dad who is such an alcoholic that they're passed out by 7 o'clock at night, and then the youth is out running the streets with their friends? Do you have a situation where the youth is going home to domestic violence? And so they're just running away and going and staying at friends' houses to get away from it. Do you have a parent or a guardian who's struggling with a mental health issue and isn't really getting the support they need? So that youth is kind of being forced to grow up inside of somebody else's mental health issue, which can create and pass on mental health issues of their own, especially around depression and anxiety.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
You know, the number one mental health issue that the youth struggle with once they're on the outs, once they're out of juvenile hall, that's what we call it, you're on the out, is depression. And depression is the number one precursor mental health issue to suicidal thinking and acting. Suicidal ideation and suicidal actions among commercially exploited youth are significantly higher than the rest of the youthful populations, especially so with LGBTQ youth. So it's a huge factor. Anxiety is number two. Anger is number three. So yeah, I'd be depressed and anxious if that's what I was going back to. And I would be mad as hell. I'd have anger control issues too. If this is my revolving door, I go into the situation, I escape from the situation, I get exploited, I get in trouble, I come back into the hall. The hall says, you know, hey, we're here to help you, you know, please don't do that again. Here's your tools, here's your coping skills, here's what to avoid. Okay, now go back and try and do it all over again in the same circumstances.
Right.
Which is why, when you think back to that one youth I shared that first story of, why would somebody say, don't send me back home, please send me to a group home? It's because she knew that going home was just going to be the same old story all over again.
Right.
So systemically addressing this generational transmission of any sort of trauma or even bad parenting style. Parents can have the best of intentions, but they may not have the skills. This can be visited upon you generation upon generation upon generation. It's what they learn, so it's what they know how to do, and it's what they're doing, and it's what their kids are learning. So not just with parenting styles, but with addiction, with mental health issues, with socioeconomic issues, with institutionalized and structural issues. We're not addressing this in a larger picture. To me, we keep treating the children, which really they're the victims and it's the symptom, but we're not getting to the cause.
And realistically, what types of programs or policies, you know, from a governmental space or from a community space would be, because anytime you're dealing with something systemic, it's difficult, it's complicated, it's not, you can't just throw, you know, one little solution or have one little center. What are some of the solutions that are being talked about in regards to actually dealing with the systemic complexity of what you're describing today?
Well, I'm encouraged to say that San Diego, I was just in a meeting yesterday with San Diego is a fairly large county. So we talked about North County, Central and South Bay. The nonprofit agencies in San Diego tend to kind of divide and conquer, and then we partner with each other. But North County Lifeline is the agency we partner with for all of our North County needs. San Diego Youth Services tends to cover the central area, and then South Bay Community Services covers the south. we partner with those agencies because the area is just too large for any one agency to try and cover effectively. But our North County Lifeline partners have just got a grant for new functional family therapy program that involves any justice involved youth and their families in family therapy, in systemic therapy. So it's addressing this as a systemic issue, not just a child's issue. And it's irregardless of insurance coverage. So they can have no coverage, low coverage, or what have you. Private insurance doesn't matter. So, which is uncommon in the nonprofit agency world. So we're always that's like getting the gold star is you get funding that doesn't have to meet some sort of insurance requirement. And we're really excited about it because it's going to be able to serve youth in their family environments, so that we're actually changing things at home, so that when they go back home now, they're getting the support they need and the change is occurring where it needs to change. The parents are getting the support. Their siblings are involved. Extended family. The only requirement is that it involves one guardian, but there's no limit to how many people it can actually accommodate. It could accommodate a multi-generational family.
That is fascinating. I mean, both of us are trained as marriage and family therapists, so we have that systemic lens. And the founders, of course, of marriage and family therapy were dealing with things like schizophrenia, eating disorders, depending, I guess, on which founder you think about. And they were having this kind of same thought, many decades ago, that we can't just send this person who has this pretty significant issue back into the environment that in essence enabled or created the issue to begin with. And yet our insurance companies, most of institutions are very individual specific, like even when I diagnose, or like a lot of people don't even know that marriage therapy is not reimbursable by insurance. You can't, it's not a code. You have to have an individual who has a problem, and then you can do some family therapy, and maybe that will be covered or not by your insurance company. We really miss the systemic thing. You're not just treating an individual, you're treating a systemic problem. And
right. And it's ironic. Here I am, a marriage and family therapist, associate marriage and family therapist. I just want to put that out there for California.
Yes.
And even my own insurance through my own agency, which is so focused on family and youth and families, it's in our name. We do youth services, but we're always engaging family. That's our goal, is to be systemic. But even our own insurance for mental health services says no relational therapy is covered. So it's to me, it's just crazy. It's just crazy.
Well, and
we don't use that word with people with mental health issues, but I'll use it for policies that make sense.
Yes, right. No, and the research shows that systemic work is much more effective in the long run anyway. And so you'd actually save money if you treated the problem correctly versus having this kind of chronic ongoing issue that you're throwing money at. So please, for those of you who are voting, consider these types of issues in regards to, local, community, and national policies that have to do with community mental health, which
Absolutely.
is such an important part. And I know a lot of people get caught up in economics and, what's in the best interest of financial policies and all that. And yet these issues, mental health and community issues, cost communities millions of dollars in all kinds of ways that it shows up, whether you are a business owner, but you've got employees who are struggling with these kinds of issues. And so now your employees aren't as effective, in providing value for your company, whether it's your community taxes. It's just a mess. We have to address this in more smart ways. So,
I had a youth in the hall kind of sum up her understanding of the problem, her problem, and the problem. In that one day she looked at me and she goes, I feel like I keep getting in trouble because I'm driving a car that has a flat tire and broken headlights. And then you guys come in here, and I come back in the hall, and then you guys keep telling me that I need to change my tire and I need to get better headlights. She says, but I'm the kid. I can't do that. So I keep getting sent back into that same car to continue my life journey, and I still have a flat tire and broken headlight, which of course I keep getting in trouble for. And her analogy to that of the car being the system is so apt, because if we don't change how they're getting through life with their family, what they're struggling with, what the real issue is, then yeah, we just keep sending them back to that same situation over and over again.
Yes, yes. Well, you know what they say, out of the mouth of babes usually comes some of the wisest insights. So in preparing for this, you know, I'm not exactly sure what you had hoped to share, and I'm not sure if my questions necessarily, you know, covered the spectrum of what you were hoping to talk about today. So is there anything that I'm not covering that you'd like to make sure and fit in here at the end?
Just that, you know, you asked what we're doing well, and I just want to let everybody know that I'm especially concerned during this period of COVID, especially because more and more things have moved online like this. And the way that I do business, you know, I meet with a lot of my youth through telehealth and everything now. And I just want people to know that there's been a huge spike in the sexual exploitation of children through electronic means during this time of COVID, doing like, you know, video and camera, you know, I think what the older generation or most middle America out there is going to think of what they'll relate to is like the peep shows or whatever, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But the online cam shows and things like that has really started to become an increasing problem.
Yeah. And that can be happening in your own home, right? I mean, right.
Yeah. I mean,
right.
if your youth has a phone,
yeah,
it's got a camera.
Right. And before everybody goes wiggy, because they all have phones and they all have cameras. My general recommendation is that the answer is not to take away electronics necessarily. I mean, you can have your limits, obviously, but I think sometimes those black and white approaches also cause problems, because we need to teach our children to responsibly and maturely engage with electronics, because at 18, when they launch, whether they go to college or move out or have a roommate, they will, if they're not prepared to be electronically intelligent, you'll be creating kind of another problem, you know. So.
Exactly. We don't want to keep them naive.
Right.
You know, but you don't want to overwhelm them either. So, you know, just having a very nuanced approach, as with most things, and just age appropriately letting them know what they need to know. I mean, you know, stranger danger still occurs, you know, over this thing. So, you know, if you don't know the person, don't give out personal information. Just be careful. And it's, again, that comes back to that support and that openness and that connection to parent and guardian. If they can come to talk to you about these things, they're far less likely to occur.
Right.
But open, honest conversations are key.
Yeah. So how do we manage our anxiety and our ability to emotionally regulate when we are addressing our kids on these topics, right? Because kids are pretty savvy on realizing, it's not safe to talk to mom about this because she's going to freak out, right? Or it's not safe to, you know, ask my dad for help on this because I'll be grounded for 3 months, right? Or something like that. So how do we keep our emotional regulation in check? How do we keep our consequences reasonable, right? Mm-hmm. So reasonable punishment per se, especially when it comes to phones. If you're grounding people for a month or more, you've lost the kid. Like, I think most kids, you know, a good grounding per se is probably not going to be longer than a day to 2 to 3, maybe, you know, a weekend, because otherwise, what's the point of behaving? So I think those are really good points. And I love how you're ending kind of with, you know, just foundational principles: love, communication, connection, education, right? The information, when families can pull, not perfectly, but in general, those kinds of things, you're creating, I think, a lot more safety.
Yes. And if I was going to give any advice to parents, I would say it's okay to feel freaked out. This is weird stuff. It's okay. But,
Parenting is a constant freak out.
it is. And, same advice that I used to give my parents back when I was working in the school systems. I worked primarily with suicidal and self-harming youth. And when you approach a parent on any safety issue with their kids, you really need to be empathetic with them and understand, okay, yes, go ahead, freak out, but have that inner freak out, you know. And it's like a supervisor told me when I came across my first suicidal youth, it's okay to freak out, but you've got to kind of make like a duck. You look at a duck and the duck is just sitting there on the surface of the water and seems like they don't have a care in the world. But if you look underneath, they're actually paddling like crazy because there's currents and there's forces that are trying to blow them off course. So, making like a duck really does work. In psychology, we call it fake it till you make it. So just fake that calm.
Yeah.
It's okay to be freaking out inside, having that inner voice going, what the hell is going on? But then the words coming out of your mouth need to be a little more caring and empathetic and understanding, because you want to open the communication, not shut it down.
Yes. Yeah. Take breaks if you need it, go to your room. I'll be with you in a minute. Right? If I need to contain myself. And I love the freak out, like find people you can freak out with, because you probably can't keep it all inside. You're trying to keep it inside in front of that child, but you need a space, right? To
absolutely
have either your therapist or a friend or a sibling or somebody that you can hopefully get good information from that you can freak out with.
Phone a friend.
Yes.
have a freak out session with your friend, but then go back and have a conversation with your child. And try and remember that your child isn't the one trying to do wrong here. It's usually somebody else trying to take advantage of them. So lay the blame where it belongs. And then empower them to understand, is this person helping me or is this person taking advantage of me? When it comes to electronics and the internet, borders, boundaries, communities, it all goes away, and you just need to empower your child to be a safe consumer.
I love it. Plus, that's a really good question to ask, just even in typical relationships. Is your friendship with this person one that is mutual, or that you're having to give more than the other person gives, right? So these are good principles, regardless of whether we're talking about sex trafficking in perspective or some type of coercion versus just kind of general relationships. Mm-hmm. So
it's one of the largest things to work on in the hall is boundaries, because a lot of them haven't had that modeled for them, or they have a healthy boundary, but it's been repeatedly violated. And it's so that boundary is broken. I mean, if you picture it as a line in the sand, it's just been stuffed up and marred, and you can hardly tell where it is anymore. So we do a lot of boundary work. One of my youths who finally came back in after a period of time was looking so much better and doing so much better, and came in for a totally unrelated incident, which she self-admitted was, it was my own stupid fault, which is, again, progress, because anyway. But she had finally said, I said, you're looking so much better. What's changed for you? And she said, well, I finally figured out where my respect line is. And I love that, because that's what a boundary is. It's a respect. If you're on that side of the line, you're respecting me. If you cross over, you've disrespected me. You've not honored my boundary, my personal space, whatever it is. And so, just teach your kids where their respect line is.
Yeah. Let's all do some respect lining.
Yes, we can. Adults need help with that too sometimes.
Oh, yeah, for sure. All right. Well, Allan, thank you so much for your time. This has been really, I think, a very important conversation. It's an important dialogue that needs to be happening in our country, in our homes, in our communities. I know there's a lot of misinformation. I know the topic itself usually spurs a reaction from us that, again, is usually well-meaning, well-intentioned. Most of us are driven crazy by the idea of kids being taken advantage of or abused in some way. And I think whenever it's sexual, it adds another component of anxiety for us. So I think
yeah.
that's a really important topic for us to cover here. So thank you for your time, for sharing of your wisdom, your expertise, and really thank you for the work that you do in your community. It's so amazing when we have people who offer these kinds of services within the mental health fields. So thank you.
Thank you very much for providing a platform and a voice and spreading the word. And the reason I keep doing what I'm doing is because the kids are awesome and they keep me young and they teach me so much.
I love that. The kids are awesome. I totally agree.
They've just forgotten, they've forgotten how awesome they are. They really have.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you. I'm gonna go take care of a dog who I'm sure has locked himself into the bathroom. And we will talk to you soon, but have a great weekend.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Time slows to nature's pace, and there is space there to find yourself in her embrace. Some places should be left alone. So we can always go to the homeland of the heart. Of our human history etched on her canyon halls, alongside Earth's mysteries. Some places should be left alone. So we can to the homeland of the heart, to the homeland of the heart. Deep in our cities, we sleep without her stars, yet still her presence sustains us from afar. Some places should be left alone. So we can always go to the homeland of the heart, to the homeland of the heart, to the home.